Everybody wants to get trained now because now, and over the years, you realize like everybody is going through trauma of one sort of another
Right.
to the, political issues, climate issues. There's even a field called eco psychoanalysis.
Wow.
Um, the pandemic, just the adolescence, social
Sure.
media crises for kids.
I would say
So,
even before a lot of like the climate crises and the pandemic, obviously, it's like life itself is a bit of a trauma, and you have like your
yeah,
capital T and your little T trauma. Whereas a little T trauma would be like even somebody being bullied at school when they're younger, like as long as it doesn't get really too terrible, like
right,
people would consider, oh, I was just bullied, and they don't realize that perhaps they've been carrying that with them their entire life. And then you have your capital T traumas, like you said, like your rape, your neglect, and your larger, more traumatic issues that are more PTSD like.
right. But in fact, um, those you're correct about the little t, small t. In fact, and the big T could be rape, it could be being a vet, it could
Sure.
be um, an earthquake, God,
Wow.
think about how many people now are affected by climate change. But,
Right.
and I've done a lot of work with that as well. But the little T's, which tend to be the more interpersonal traumas, being bullied, being constantly criticized, those, in fact, there's a very large scale study that showed that the little T's were more predictive of later onset of post traumatic stress than the big T's. And I think
Wow.
that and bullying is very highly correlated with PTSD. And I think it's because trauma is not just about what happens, it's about what happens next after the trauma. And with these, more multi traumas, it's less likely, especially for children, and if they're growing up already in dysfunctional families where that's happening or they don't know how to support, they're not getting the support they need because, um, if you go through something terrible and people rally around you, you have a much better chance of healing. And with those big T traumas, often community support is there,
Wow.
etc. So it's very interesting.
Right. So you're saying that with the little T traumas, like a bullying or a hypercritical environment to grow up in, because these are just standard things. Not only does no one rally around you because it's kind of the norm in a broken system, so to speak,
Yeah,
and
it's
then you see that show up later in life, or it's kind of like, how does that
right, because
present itself afterwards?
what happens is, really I look at trauma as anything that negatively affects the psyche in the long haul.
Right.
So, what happens is these little T's can be like 10,000 paper cuts. They just, happen kind of all, time after time. And when somebody's in high level of distress, which is why it matters about what happens next. When somebody's in a high level of distress for a long period of time,
Hmm.
the brain um, uh, takes what's happening and it's held in what's called implicit memory. It doesn't have a chance to crosstalk with everything else to make sense of it, to come to some adaptive place with it. So, the trauma, time after time, it could lay like kindling in the brain, and something at a later time can just trigger it off, and then the person becomes symptomatic later. Some people become symptomatic right away, and some people it happens much later because
Right.
there's, you know,
So I can imagine if there's someone that goes through